Trusting that our cause is just and having prayed for the fortitude to brave spiritual wickedness in high places, we, the people of Terra, make this announcement to the shareholders of the U.S. corporation and to all countries that hold the status of private corporations, including the City of London, the British Crown, and the Vatican, and their operatives in the media, government, and society.
With the utmost respect and admiration for the founding fathers of each free nation and the farmers of their true and original declarations of independence, we, the people of Terra, humbly emulate their thoughtful, measured response to certain perpetual and ascending tyranny and despotism. We too believe it is the moral obligation of those privileged with knowledge and opportunity to work on behalf of the people, that the people are served best when their benefactors choose unity over division, nationalism over globalism, sovereignty over submission, and liberty over oppression, that all human beings are equal in their innate value, that all free nations were founded under a superior being, that the superior being of all free nations is just peaceable and tolerant, that our natural rights and sovereigns come from birthright, and that such divine given rights may not be revoked, suspended, negated, or abridged without due process. What distinguishes this planetary declaration of independence from its progenitors is the object from which we seek independence.
Regrettably, to our great misfortune, shame, and dismay, and despite the recurrent warnings and accorded safeguards, a cabal of foreign investors and privateers have managed to gain possession of our national lands, our wealth, our labor, our well-being, our future, and especially our children.
Although history has become muddied with varied interpretations of cardinal events, including the surreptitious adoption of subsequent corporate constitutions and the uncertain ratification of several amendments destructive of the people, it matters only that one or more alien groups of undisclosed origins lay claim to nations and its assets. Rather than speculate on motives, await unprofitably the biased accounts, unverifiable information, and plenteous theories and opinions, we engage a perfect solution wherein we, the people of Terra, exact independence from all claimants, past and present, proclaimed, identified, or veiled. As such, the usurpers named in this declaration are representative and not specific or exhaustive, regardless of supposed ancestry, precedent, instrument, or process.
Although simply in enumerating transgressions and usurpations would suffice to justify insularity. Recounting significant events reveals important facts that are missing from history. These forgotten facts add insight, perspective, and clarity, illuminating our best way forward.
Number one, the inevitable civil wars destroyed the economies of nations, ripped families apart, and cast a questionable shadow on the promising future of a nation. Nations so economically and socially shattered were in trouble financially and needed a massive infusion of capital in order to restore its structure.
A cabal of nation-building venture capitalists from various places and of various upbringing agreed to finance such nations' recovery, but demanded an active role in government to ensure their investment. In 1871, mired in debt, the American Congress worked out a partnership. In exchange for boundless financial support, the foreign investors would handle America's administrative needs.
3. Although initially it seemed to be an innocuous concession, the consequences of allowing the nation-building venture capitalists to conduct America's business beyond the protections of the U.S. Constitution proved catastrophic. The investors quickly embedded operatives throughout a foreign-owned corporate government, and Washington, D.C. began serving the interests of America's financiers over the people. In 1871, America effectively lost its independence, and the nation-building venture capitalists became our new masters.
By the early 1900s, the foreign investors that bankrolled America controlled the major newspapers and news services, enabling them to shape what is reported and how it is so to be framed. They had to cover their tracks before being exposed and repudiated by the people. The infamous triangle of City of London, the Vatican, Washington, D.C., laid out their plans to bring all other free nations to its knees, following the same strategy.
5. The nation-building venture capitalists worked to soften the free nation's imperturbable elevated system of government. The founders of America had formed a constitutional republic instead of a democracy, specifically to prevent citizens in the majority from oppressing those in the minority. By doing what is best for their district or state rather than enforce the majority will, representatives serve all citizens equally, eliminating the noise, division, and violence intrinsic to democracies. Being in control of the narrative, the foreign investors ingeniously promoted the fallacy that America is a democracy, trusting that the deception would lead to unrest and chaos that would make America vulnerable, creating additional opportunities to infiltration and manipulation.
6. In 1913, the foreign investors established an anti-defamation league to slander anyone who exposed them and their infiltration into American politics.
7. In 1913, by the way of the 16th Amendment, the foreign investors were granted the authority to tax the American people directly, something expressly prohibited by the original Constitution. That the people would willingly subject themselves to forced confiscation of their property, their labor, is illogical, putting the legitimacy of ratification in question.
8. In 1913, by way of the 17th Amendment, the foreign investors breached an important safeguard that protected our constitutional republic from infiltration by enemy forces. Previously, senators were statesmen appointed by the respective state legislatures as a check on the House of Representatives, raiding the public treasury. Henceforth, senators would run as glorified House representatives, reduced to promising free public money and services for votes. The authenticity of ratification is unlikely because the state legislatures would not willingly surrender their authority to bridle the appetite of the people's house, nor would they accede to transfer more power to the federal government, opening yet another door for the international bankers to buy the influence they need to further their grip on America.
9. In 1913, the foreign investors gained control of our currency by pushing through Congress the Federal Reserve Act, establishing a foreign-owned central banking system despite the dire warnings of presidents Thomas Jefferson, Andrew Jackson, Abraham Lincoln, Andrew Johnson, James Garfield, and William McKinley. The Federal Reserve Act passed with the help of compromised legislators between 1:30 a.m. to 4:30 a.m. on December 22nd, when most members were away on the Christmas holiday.
10. In 1920, Congress, by the way of the Independent Treasury Act, turned over the U.S. Treasury Department and its assets, our gold and silver, to the Federal Reserve, the central banking system owned by the foreign investors, established in 1913.
11. In 1921, the Council on Foreign Relations was formed under cover of advancing America's interests in the world. In fact, the CFR is sponsored by the infamous triangle, City of London, Vatican, Washington, D.C., and serves to advance the interests of the foreign-owned Federal Reserve by directing the President, Congress, and the narrative through operatives in their news and information networks. In the same token, the cabal of foreign investors began to use the democracy propaganda to advance the narrative that democracy is the only model that every free nation should convert to.
12. In 1925, the owners of the Federal Reserve formed the United States Corporation. Just 5 out of the 100 shares issued were identified, with the balance of the shareholders of the U.S. Corp remaining anonymous. Yet the money trail leads to the City of London, the British Crown, and the Vatican. The tax dollars of the American people were sent to the Internal Reserve Service to go to the International Monetary Fund and the World Bank, which are under their control.
12a. By now, the first wave of democracies, 1828, 1926, were completed, with France, Britain, Canada, Australia, Italy, Argentina before 1900, and the breakup of Russian, German, Austrian, and Ottoman empires in 1918, totaling 29 democracies in the world.
13. The official formation of the U.S. Court set the stage for the transformation of America from a constitutional republic of the people to a corporation owned by foreign investors and their families. Over the next few years, the individual states were registered as corporations as well, making them franchises of the U.S. Court. Representatives and senators neither represent nor work for the American people. Rather, they are the managers of the U.S. Court, and as such they are obligated first to serve its best interests. The president is not just the president of America, he is the CEO of the U.S. Court.
14. The abbreviated term United States was purposely used to represent both America and U.S. Court to blur the distinction between them. Similarly, the original U.S. Constitution was quietly supplanted by an impostor corporate, all capital letters, Constitution. That bears a similar name and appearance again to confuse and deceive the American people. Specifically, the Constitution for the United States of America was replaced by the Constitution of the United States, with the latter's corporate statutes becoming the supreme law of America.
15. In 1933, the U.S. federal government declared bankruptcy, and President Roosevelt, its acting CEO, signed over to U.S. coal, America and its assets, including the people and our labor. The bankruptcy of 1933, that was arguably unnecessary, ceremonial in nature, and contrived and orchestrated without the consent of the people, completed the heist and transfer of America and its assets, the same foreign investors who own U.S. coal.
16. In the bankruptcy of 1933, U.S. court forced the American people to surrender their gold in trade for debt notes called dollars, fiat currency that has no real value and that is depreciated continually through inflation to where it is worth just 4 cents today.
17. The bankruptcy of 1933 put the U.S. court in a state of emergency, allowing it to implement admiralty law, made evident by the gold fringe around the American flag. When in a U.S. courtroom, you are considered at sea and not as an American citizen.
18. In 1936, U.S. court began issuing Social Security numbers to turn otherwise sovereign Americans into trustees of corporate fictions, making our labor taxable, which would otherwise be unconstitutional. According to U.S. court, you are not a live man or woman, but rather a representative of a corporation in your name.
18A. By 1942, the Democrats dropped a mere 12 nations, urging the cabal to find a new solution to advance this social destructive agenda.
19. In 1945, the anonymous owners of U.S. court founded the United Nations under the guise of spreading peace, civility, and humanitarian assistance throughout the world. Yet their true purpose is to condition the people of Terra to recognize an international authority, a first step in establishing their promised New World Order, in which the U.S. Constitution and all constitutions of the free nations are retired to make room for a universal totalitarian government.
19A. The second wave of democracies followed the end of World War II. By 1962, were recognized as 36 democracies in the world. Between 1962 and 1973, the numbers dropped to 30.
19B. The third wave of democracies began in 1974 with Portugal and Spain's transition to a democratic government. In the 1980s, Latin American countries followed, and so did the Asian Pacific countries such as Philippines, South Korea, and Taiwan between 1986 to 1988. Eastern Europe and Sub-Saharan Africa became democracies from 1989. Pivotal in the majority of these transitions was the Vatican Council of 1962, in which the Catholic Church turned into a strong opponent of totalitarianism, in fact advancing further the agenda of the New World Order using religion to destabilize the free nations.
19C. Following the staged 9/11 attack to the Twin Towers in New York City, the cabal launched a war on terror that aimed at forcefully introduce democracy into Middle Eastern countries, and at the same time increasing the terroristic attacks in different nations of the world.
20. United Nations publications Agenda 21 and Agenda 30 reveal the New World Order agenda, calling for the end of nationalism, patriotism, private property, individual rights, the two-parent family, automobiles, air travel, and the right to defend ourselves from a tyrannical government. In keeping with their goal of sustainable development, they plan to reduce the population by over 90%, ridding planet Terra of dissidents and useless eaters. The remaining useful servants are to live in coastal communities wherein there will be stacked and packed in micro apartments.
21. The only thing standing in the way of their New World Order are strong, prosperous, and secure free nations leading in cooperation toward the one and only objective of people awakening. To achieve their goal of world domination, the cabal needs that free nations must lose their sovereignty and leadership position, and thus why the owners of the US core are quietly working to undermine culture, systems, beliefs, standards, and aspirations, morals of the most ancient nations of Terra, for over 100 years employing unrestrained methods and tactics.
22. With trillions of dollars at their disposal every year from taxing out labor, the owners of US Court, the City of London, the Vatican, fund leftist non-profit groups, including the Council on Foreign Relations, that work to subvert free nations and silence anyone in opposition. They ingratiate the officials and administrators who run the largest charities and organizations, including the AMA, APA, the CDC, the FCC, the SEC, and the FDA, and their embed operatives in the State Departments, the Department of Justice, and the intelligence agencies, official and covert, including the NSA, FBA, CIA, MI6, Mossad, and other national and international agencies.
23. In trade for generous grants and endowments, the anonymous owners of the US core, City of London, the Vatican, shape the curriculum and political sentiment of the public schools, colleges, and universities, ensuring the next generations, our children, harbor disdain for their country, their history, their culture, their families, and even their ethnicity.
24. The anonymous owners of US Court, City of London, the Vatican keep the people of Terra in the dark about the true history of America and of the free nations, the greatest, highest, and cover-up in history, by controlling public education, the major publishers, the news services, the airwaves, and the social and information networks.
25. The foreign owned. One sec, sorry. 25. The foreign owners of US Court, the City of London, the Vatican prop up puppets throughout society and governments, allowing them to make millions of dollars in trade for perpetuating their agenda of secrecy and subjugation of the free nations. These traders include prominent politicians, newsreaders, pundits, authors, movie stars, and the heads of the social, news, and informative networks, major sports teams, music and entertainment industries, and corporate conglomerates, responsible for over 90% of the products designed, manufactured, advertised, purchased, financed, and consumed.
26. By the way of funding campaigns and fixing elections, the owners of US Court, the City of London, the Vatican obligate the most influential politicians to further their agenda of breaking America and all free nations socially and financially. They promote disdain for country, dependency on government, indulgence, lawlessness, and immorality, to spoil and dishearten citizens, predisposing them to trade their sovereignty for the false promises of an international unelected government sponsored by the world elite.
27. By the way of the Democratic parties and operatives, posing as television hosts, entertainers, journalists, pundits, and political experts, the owners of the US core brainwash and condition the people of Terra to accept their invalid arguments and pseudoscience that call for globalism, socialism, and the godless society in which technology is our moral compass.
28. The operatives of the foreign-owned U.S. Corp, the City of London, the Vatican are deeply rooted throughout the news and information networks, academia, government, and society. Colloquially referred to as the deep state, the shadow government, and the swamp, the operatives perform with a hive mind because they are guilty of treason, crime punishable with death. They are desperate to hide their complicity, and thus they are systematically target, demonize, and even suicide, all with threaten to expose their treachery and malfeasance.
29. The operatives of the US Corps, the City of London, and the Vatican favor unbridled immigration into the free nations because it is the most expedient way to destroy a country from within, flooding a nation with illegal immigrants without allowing them time to assimilate and ensures arrogance, separation, anti-nationalism, anger, animosity, and conflict with the people. By design, we are also expected to we can also expect a steady dilution of the principles, ethics, systems that made the most ancient civilizations successful. Moreover, the majority of illegal immigrants are likely to vote for Democrats who legislate according to the will of the foreign owners of the US Corps, City of London, and the Vatican.
30. Because the free, open, and largely unrestrained internet reveals the hidden highest of America, European free nations before a European Union establishment, and the criminal network that operates in the shadows, the owner of U.S. Corp, the City of London, the Vatican, the perpetrators of crimes against America, the free nations, and the people of terror, are rightly concerned about exposure. To ensure the people of do not wake up, organize, and exact justice, they censor the information we see, ply us with psychotropic drugs, make us complacent with free money from the government, distract us with computerized video games, and provide us with one meaningless sporting event after another.
31. In conjunction with skewed statistics, deceptive polls, false facts, and the omission of decisive information, the owners of the US Corps, City London, and the Vatican promote anti-nationalism, race equality, mixed gender, populism, culture flattering, and the New World Order agenda. Fake news, the people of terror, disorientated, misinformed, and divided over ethnicity, gender, sexual orientation, religion, and economic class. Meanwhile, their debt system enslaves them. Their grip ever tightens through the surveillance and fluorination, vaccinations, and other technologies are deployed to weaken any substantive opposition.
32. The owners of U.S. Court, the City of London, the Vatican are working incessantly to disarm the millions of law-abiding patriots who stand in the way of their totalitarian, oppressive New World Order. By the way of orchestrated mass shootings, terrorist attacks, or pandemics, and possibly threats from space, the owners of U.S. Court, the City of London, the Vatican will continue to terrorize the people of terror until we assent to comprehensive background checks. The word comprehensive is nebulous and undefined, allowing for battery of psychological and medical testing, ever expanding until targeted individuals are deemed emotionally unstable and a danger to society. True to the predictions of every futuristic book and movie, patriotic from all free nations will be disarmed by the way of political profiling under the guise of screening for mental health.
33. Through their vast indoctrination machine, the foreign owners of the US Corps, the City of London, the Vatican, have convinced the people of terror that America is a democracy, and the democracy is the highest form of government for all other nations. This is problematic because democracy is, by definition, mob rule. Democracies invariably fail because the majority mob always demands more and more public monies and services procured through excessive taxation and other socialist-like policies, resulting in an economic ruin, runaway debt, fiscal collapse, and ultimately social implosion, opening the door for the promised, predicted, dreadful, and ever-looming the New World Order. Because sovereignty is not sustainable without exposing the ills of democracy and reestablishing an elevated form of constitutional republic, we are compelled to make the following proclamations.
A. The word democracy does not appear anywhere in America's founding documents because the framers knew that democracy in any form or disguise is fatally flawed, leading invariably to oppression, unrest, societal failure, violence, and death.
B, all modern forms of government are elected democratically. They are differentiated only by who makes the decision after elections are over.
C. In a democracy, citizens in the majority make the sales, leaving those in the minority oppressed. Consequently, a democracy is always noisy, divisive, divided, inefficient, unsteady, combustible, fiscally irresponsible, and short-lived.
D. America was established as a constitutional republic to avoid the many ills of democracy. In a constitutional republic, those elected must not do the bidding of the citizen majority. Rather, they must do what is best for their district or state, despite the majority will. In this way, all citizens are represented equally, and no one is oppressed, making a constitutional republic quiet, steady, efficient, and preferred.
E. Although the word democracy feels good, it is founded on mob rule, making it akin to socialism, communism, and every other tyrannical form of government.
F. Finally, Article 4, Section 4 of the U.S. Constitution resolves any doubt. The United States shall guarantee to every state in this union a republican form of government.
Having exposed the greatest, highest, and cover-up in history, we are able to summarize. America, the free nations of the world and their assets were quietly hijacked, and the cover-up has resulted in unthinkable crimes against the people of Terra and humanity at large. Allowing the hostile takeover to stand would lead eventually to complete and irreversible subjugation and the eradication of truth, justice, and all that is good in the world.
This Planetary Declaration of Independence distinguishes the free forms of international governments from the subversive democracies. It asserts that the U.S. Court, the international organizations such as UN, NATO, EU, WHO, APEC, ASEAN, and the like were formed illegally, and the foreign owned, and the shareholders have been quietly at war with America and the free nations for over 150 years. Treasonous operatives embedded within the government and the fake news networks purposely divide the citizens and facilitate conflict among the nations to hide the US core. The City of London, the Vatican are, and always has been the only real enemy of the people of Terra. This Planetary Declaration of Independence, oh wait, is it still me?
Yes.
Yeah, sorry. The people of Terra. This Planetary Declaration of Independence also repudiates with conviction the cabal's satanically inspired plan for world governments. In addition of being of, by, and for the cabal, and not the people of Terra, their falsely advertised pseudo-utopian, unelected, totalitarian New World Order would supplant the free nation's sovereignty and extinguish forever any semblance of liberty and prosperity.
Because natural inclinations predispose human beings to be short-sighted, malleable, and easily gullible, one might presume the people of Terra should bear responsibility for being swindled out of their homeland, inherited from their forefathers who procured and secured it at great expense and much sacrifice, and for slowly but steadily trading the largely unappreciated blessings of liberty, opportunity, and prosperity for trinkets in the form of unearned comforts, frivolous indulgences, and gluttonous pleasures.
However, the transfer of ownership from the people of Terra was not concluded openly with candor, but clandestinely through the calculated design and nefarious means, without body consent and unconstitutionally. It is for the latter reason that the people of Terra claim their right to recitification. That is the greatest heist in history was effected outside the constraints of the legitimate constitution and those who were elected to represent the nation's best interests transgressed their feudatory responsibility and exceeded their authority, warrants its proclamation, and the people of Terra are rightful owners of their land, their labor, their well-being, their future, and their children, for their benefit and their benefit of their legacy.
As with any negotiated peace, after years of atrocities committed by parties at war, we seek neither vengeance nor demand justice for past transgressions. We simply adjure the return of what rightly belongs to the people of Terra, and avow firmly, emphatically, publicly, and officially that all free nations shall forever remain a sovereign nation, free, self-directed, and not affiliated or dependent upon any version or variation of the present planned or innovated New World Order.
We, the people of Terra, entreat a bloodless solution wherein you cease all destruction activities, including false flag events, dissolve the US court, the City of London, the Vatican, and other illicit illegal structures and custodial instruments, return to each free or freed nation the land and its assets, including its gold and silver, redirect the tax collected on labor back to each free or freed nation, and have any deep state and shadow government operatives retire, withdrawing your influence in an orderly fashion so that the world society continues to thrive in trade for you keeping your wealth, your possession, and your heads.
In response to questions regarding legitimacy, efficacy, and process of throwing off the shackles of national thraldom is elementary and unambiguous, as evidenced by the separation of the 13 colonies from Britain in 1776, the Mexican people from Spain in 1825, and all other nations that tied all bonds with imperialist forces around the world. A formal declaration, hailed by authorized representatives, procures independence that is immediate, whole, consummate, infrangible, and unencumbered by obligation, condition, or imposition.
As we enter the grievous territory, we reflect on the precarious road of free nations forefathers forged when they judiciously served the political and familial ties that bound them. Our hearts are also filled with melancholy and trepidation, yet we too are resolute in our posture and positions from being confronted with no better option. Despite the manifest peril, the consequences of acquiescence are greater still, compelling us to claim solemnly our independence once again. So in support of this declaration, with its firm resilience on the protection of divine providence, we mutually pledge to each other our lives, our fortunes, and our sacred honor.
The people of Terra, the signatories of the task force, are to be affixed at the time of presentation to Congress, the President, the state, district, prefecture, region, and legislatures, and the governors of the respective states.